Welcome to the ECNP Precision Psychiatry Roadmap podcast series, where key stakeholders share their perspectives on shaping the future of psychiatry. In this episode, PhD student Silvia Bruzzone sits down with Professor Martien Kas and Dr. Hugh Marston, both members of the ECNP Roadmap Steering Committee. Together, they discuss the urgent need for a new biology-informed framework for mental disorders and explore how this could be realized.
Before we start, I would like to introduce our guests, and probably the best way to do it is to let Hugh introduce yourselves.
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Martien Kas. I'm a professor of behavioural neuroscience at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands, and I'm currently also the ECNP president and project coordinator of the PRISM project.
Hello everybody, my name's Hugh Marston. I'm currently head of mental health research at Boehringer Ingelheim.
So why do we need a roadmap for psychiatry?
Well, we currently have a classification system for psychiatry, and that is being used as a global language to actually classify patients and to allow clinicians to talk with their patients, to provide them with treatments, and to also to get reimbursement for the costs of those treatments. The point is that patients are suffering, and actually we have 800 million people living with a mental health disorder at the moment. And the cost of that, and the economic cost and the burden of that, is comparable to 4% of the gross domestic product. And also the suffering from the patients themselves and their families should really be taken into account. I think time has come that we have to realize that there is quite a burden of mental disorders that is enormous and growing. And we also have to realize that this burden is partly due to treatment failures. So what we're doing is not right yet, and we need to find out what it is. And what this roadmap is providing is guidance. It tries to bring precision to psychiatry, where we would hope to go towards a biologically based framework for mental illness. So actually taking in the innovation from science into classification of patients, bringing the right treatment to the right patient at the right time.
Maybe Martina, I can pick up there and give us some sort of historical perspective, because clearly there is a very significant issue we have now here sitting in the 2020s. But the history of psychiatry goes back a long way. And if we go back even to the late 1800s, that was when people began to think about how we deal with mental health disturbances. And indeed, history goes back even thousands of years in terms of the problems in the psychiatric space. But a huge revolution in the way psychiatry or modern psychiatry is deployed happened in the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s, with major breakthroughs in the psychopharmacological agents that were available. So back in 1952, chlorpromazine, the first neuroleptic, was released. Shortly after 59, you saw the first tricyclic antidepressant, imipramine, coming to market. Haloperidol, the first generation antipsychotic, was in 1960. And diazepam, the most widely prescribed benzodiazepine, was first marketed in 1963. Bringing those tools to the clinical ability to deal with psychiatric patients revolutionized how we coped with the patients in those days. And we saw a huge change of people being incarcerated in mental health hospitals to slowly moving out into the community and the integration of these patients in a much more effective way. This was done within a framework of us not really understanding how the brain worked. This was more serendipitous discovery, and it was more descriptive in the way that actually things worked. And this descriptive language has been formulated through the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, or DSM, which first came out in 1952. But DSM-3 in 1980 really was the tipping point where we moved from a rather chaotic situation of drugs and not really understanding to a really very nicely structured way that clinicians could look at a patient, have a series of questions and answers that could be taken forward that would enable somebody to be classified in a particular group, and that then helped guide the treatment options that were available. But that also then led to how we actually went about research. Because of the DSM structure, depression, schizophrenia, these sorts of words, that's in many ways provided the template by which we tried to understand what's been going on. This unfortunately led to a point where really there were no major innovations in psychotherapeutics available from that point. So in terms of major classes of drug available, nothing has appeared since the 1970s. There have been small incremental changes, but nothing dramatic. So that's where this problem that Martien has just alluded to has come from, is that we're now in a space where we are actually beginning to understand a huge amount about how the brain works. We now have fMRI scanning, we have PET scanning, we have EEG, we have all sorts of things going on which tells us about how the brain works. But we're in a space where actually the way we talk about our patients is entirely non-biologic. It's descriptive of the symptomatology. And what we really would need to do is bring this history of success in the psychiatric space and align it with the huge movement we've seen in biology. And that perhaps then leads us to a new framework of thinking about those that are living with the mental health challenges on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, thank you, Hugh, indeed. So, as you said, the current classification tools are limited and aren't actually solving our clinical problems. So, there is very poor biological validity of the current classifications, despite good internal reliability of diagnostic terms. Also, biology has shown us that there is quite some heterogeneity in the patient population that's not being captured at the moment. Also, there is transdiagnostic overlap, where the current classification schemes has very clear boundaries from one disorder to the other. Actually, biology is learning us that there is actually much more overlap than we could envision. So what is missing at the moment is really a lack of integration with science. Our current classification tools are too rigid and don't allow for therapeutic advances based on translation of modern science. And as Hugh indicated, this is really the time to start doing it. We're learning from the patients, we're learning from the biology, we have the technologies coming to us, so we need a classification system that allows us for discovery of mechanism-based treatments. What we actually would like to see is the flexibility. As science is innovating over time, we need a way where the novel science can actually enter into the classification system and actually optimizing it as we go forward. We need to integrate biology with behavioral syndromes or symptoms. Indeed, mental disorders arise from biology of brain and its interaction with environment. And it's important that we use that knowledge to treat the patient better. It also will help, I think, changing the perception of mental illness, to destigmatize and expand our understanding and provide a pathway for improvement. So this roadmap is truly a call to action and collaboration. And we know in science, many initiatives are going on globally, but we need to somehow harmonize these efforts, and they need to be organized using similar tools, similar language, and similar principles. So that's why this roadmap was actually formulated, to actually bring together approaches, tools, languages for progress, and really try to define together as a community precision psychiatry in our way forward.
That sounds exciting. How does it look like in practice, though?
I think we begin to see that there are areas where we really can begin to move forward. So, for instance, if we think about the concept of as a conceptualization group of schizophrenia. Now, we've often thought about schizophrenia and how we do treat schizophrenia. We're very effective at the moment at controlling the positive symptoms with the atypical neuroleptics. So control and stabilization is definitely possible at the moment. But we all know that within the schizophrenia domain, individuals have significant problems with negative symptoms. They have significant problems with cognitive symptoms. And these actually probably all interact in different ways on specific biological circuits. And the circuits that are involved in the positive symptoms are actually different from the symptoms that are affected in the cognitive processing. And again, you have a third group that are probably interacting on the negative side. All of these circuits interact at a biological level, but they are independent. So if we're going to be targeting treatments and approaches, then to these areas that have unmet needs, such as the negative symptoms and the cognition, we need to understand that biology. And that biology is emerging. And there are both talking therapies as well as pharmacological therapies, which are moving forward and getting closer to the market in that sense. As they get to market, then they become available for the clinician to use. But we need to guide the way we think about schizophrenia so that if new ideas do become available and deployable, that they then are deployed and that they do get to those that are suffering from those conditions on an everyday basis. Therefore, needing to think about this biological interface is increasingly important. There may even be components within the psychiatric space where the current labeling actually doesn't really work at all. So, for instance, Martien and I have been very fortunate to lead for nearly the last 10 years a program looking at social dysfunction. But we've looked at social dysfunction across the domains of Alzheimer's dementia, schizophrenia, and major depressive disorders. Now, what we're finding is there is biological commonality between the way social dysfunction occurs in all those different patient groups. But at the moment, we have no way of easily explaining to a clinical community, to a patient community, to a payer community, regulatory community, that by going after one particular biology, we may be able to help different people across those different domains with the same manipulation. And that's what Martien means by transdiagnostic. If you are able to help those people, then what is referred to as transdiagnostic, in a sense, then becomes diagnostic. So that if you say, I want to treat social dysfunction in Alzheimer's or schizophrenia or in major depression, and you do it successfully, then you're actually treating social dysfunction. You're not treating AD or schizophrenia or whatever. So that's where we're beginning to see this evolution and why the framework needs to develop. So it's not just that we think this is something we need to do. We're actually seeing that we've actually got hard examples of where we can begin to apply this type of thinking.
Yeah, that's right. But this will require a lot of steps and alignment in the field, I would say. So these are some examples that are being done, and there are many, many other groups working on these things. But the question is, how do we bring this in a way together to advance the field more efficiently and to be able to integrate that knowledge in our classification system as it is currently? So that's, I think, is the challenge. And what this roadmap is providing a way to actually hopefully bring that forward. But this is a global initiative. We need global alignment. And we also need to recognize that there is quite a lot of knowledge out there already. So some of the components that we actually put forward in the roadmap really rely on the identification and curation of existing quantitative measures. We need to be able to measure the biology that is important for these disorders and to actually more precisely define the patient population. And there is, of course, a lot of knowledge about biological systems, circuits, molecules that are related to, for example, behavioral outcome. So there is some knowledge already available about mechanistic evidence. So we should use that knowledge. The question then is next, of course, is if you have all that knowledge, how are you going to harmonize this? So we need harmonization across existing, but also we need probably future studies to do that. We need to validate the quantitative measures. We need to define the standards. So we really need a platform that allows us to do the development of these validation and improving of these quantitative measures and biomarkers. So this will require a large investment of people, but in a way that we actually progressing with the science, not on islands, but actually do it with the same purpose and with the same language and the same methodologies. So I think those are quite relevant to consider. There are a few more points that we have identified, of course, on this roadmap, but I'm not sure, Hugh, do you want to add on to some of those I just mentioned?
No, thank you, Martien. I think maybe something that we could just make a real point there is it's as much changing mindset as anything else. So what's been really great is having different stakeholders over these discussions have led to this paper, bringing together all their thoughts. It doesn't really matter whether they've come from academic science, clinical delivery, regulatory backgrounds, industry backgrounds. We're all very much the same idea that what we need to do is bring biology into the way we think about the individual suffering from a mental health illness. We need to, in a sense, join the mind to the brain and accept that everything that's happening in that behavioral symptomatic space actually is driven by biological circuit systems, genetics, genomics, proteomics, all of these sorts of things. And that's bringing it together, changing that mindset so that we actually are thinking about the biological drivers that are leading people to suffer these issues. These factors change with time. And that's another component that we want to build into this framework, is so that we can find ways of assessing and stratifying the patient, not just on a particular day, but across days, across weeks, across months, maybe their problems change, maybe their problems resolve, maybe they go up and down, maybe they even change in terms of actually the diagnosis according to the current framework. Biologically, we feel that there is much more similarity, and that's where we were trying to bring that in.
Yeah, so clearly, as you indicate, we need to bridge the research frameworks of brain function and behavior with the classification of mental disorders to really be able to inform the future classification and treatment. So we really need to better understand biological subtypes based at the circuit level. Can we distinction, for example, between EEG measures, between patients within a certain symptom domain, and could that provide a basis for treatment? So indeed, we need to have the discussion, we need to learn from the new insights, and we need a way to bring them together. And I think one way would be to indeed discuss with the current classification system how we can actually bring this together to make it as effective as we need. We simply have to realize that our biological knowledge has advanced, so we don't know the brain fully, but what we have learned thus far should be used in an efficient way to better help the patients. I think there is a huge need, and we need to. The main issue is, of course, is how to implement this all, because there are many, many components to that. This involves many, many stakeholders, many, many efforts. And that's also why within the ECNP, we decided to form a steering committee to actually drive this roadmap. People in that steering committee are coming from industry, from academia, regulation, really trying to get together to form this roadmap and to try to consider all the relevant components of it. So we have to think about how can we influence this new knowledge and actually implement it in clinical practice. I think those are very important aspects. How do we communicate this to the general public so they are more aware of what's happening? And think about education. So really about educating the new people for science, but also for clinical practice. We have to get this understanding to the psychiatrists. They need to understand this refinement, this biology that is driving this classification. So yeah, I think many goals that we put towards, but I think we have to do it. There is a huge, high unmet need, as I indicated earlier. And I think we as a field have the obligation to do this. And it will take time. It will take budget. It will take many stakeholders to be with us. And that's why we hope to reach consensus using this roadmap as a way forward.
So Martien, that was a really clear and full description of the various different actions and steps, whys and hows that we've discussed at the New Frontiers meeting that ECNP convened in Nice, and how that's then been turned into that paper. From a personal perspective, I know Nice is very famous for the light and how it stimulates painters to come up with fantastic images. So I'm sort of thinking to myself that what really we're now trying to do is bring a strong biological foundation to what historically has been really an art of psychiatry. And if we can begin to think about how that mindset changes, that might help us move in the right direction.
That's very nicely put. Denise. So well done, Hugh. I like that very much. Yeah, so maybe closing by saying that I'm very pleased what we have this established, of course, but I also realize that we have a lot of work ahead of us as a group. And this is really a call to action to the community at many different levels. Be aware that this is just the kickoff of the roadmap. So it's really meant as a stepwise approach to address the items that I just indicated, and that we really need the full community to join us in working groups to address certain aspects. We need support from funding and governmental agencies. And I also would like to call to action not only for all these activities, but I really hope that the field is willing to join this Precision Psychiatry Roadmap so that we can go towards a biologically based framework for mental disorders and address the burden that's out there, because there is a huge unmet need.
Thank you, and thank you for being here today.
Thanks for listening to this podcast from the European College of Neuropsychopharmacology. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the interviewee and not necessarily the official position of the ECNP. And of course, this should not be the basis for clinical treatment decisions.